The absolutely incredible Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition has finally made it to Switch. And this one has had an interesting life cycle. It appeared on the Wii initially, then it came to the new 3DS, and now it's here on Switch in a definitive edition. And definitive really is one word for it, for sure. I mean, the 3DS upgrade was pretty decent. I obviously like the actual fact that it had 3D on it, and the Wii obviously original is a classic in terms of how it kind of really put this franchise on the map in the West. But this Switch edition, honestly, it's shot up to one of the top RPGs on the Switch now. I mean, that's a pretty bold claim when you consider that already you've got the likes of, obviously Xenoblade Chronicles 2 is already on there. You've got Breath of the Wild on there. And, obviously Link's Awakening is a huge one as well. But this is just fantastic. I mean, I am absolutely full on committed to this game at the moment. It's quite simple because, I mean, obviously you've seen here the combat is automated, so like it's not even a case of, it's not a sort of dynamic as a Final Fantasy VII remake where you're constantly having to tap square and you're using strategizing by pausing on the fly. Literally you just click on an enemy to fight them, you go straight to them and you go right into battle, which is pretty simplistic. But the difference with this is obviously there are different art styles that you can use in your battles as well. You've obviously got parties and you've each got different abilities. And at the moment you're seeing basically right at the beginning of the game, so you're seeing the bare amount of abilities. But as soon as you get the Monado, which is basically the Xenoblade, and it's the mech destroying sword that Shulk actually picks up during the game, it completely changes everything. One thing I did find a little bit frustrating as well with the combat is obviously, when you're fighting, each character has their own little catchphrase they keep saying, and there's a lot of repetition. It's an issue I did find with Xenoblade Chronicles 2 as well, and some of those do get a little bit corny, a little bit frustrating to listen to over time. But I mean, it's a minor gripe, and it's kind of a serious staple. So it's what you're kind of seeing here as well is that when you defeat enemies and you pick up the blue orbs on the ground, you get little collectibles and things like that. So you can actually place these to get little rewards. And obviously this is throughout the game as well. So this is for Colony and Land where you start the game, but as you progress through, there are different stages, different areas where you can collect different things. This is the achievement screen. Obviously there are cool achievements to collect as well as you go throughout the game. And you've got the items there as well, so you can obviously equip different items and abilities. This gives you kind of a feel of the cutscenes in the game as well. I think I really want to talk a little bit about how the Definitive Edition has kind of changed this. I mean, if you look at the Wii original and you see obviously the graphics were, for the time were pretty impressive, but this Definitive Edition has just made everything seem so much more lifelike, so much more alive and modern. The facial expressions of the characters are just mind-blowing at times. I mean, look at Shulk there, he looks pretty awesome, as does Ryan. I mean, this feels like a modern release. This feels like it was made for Switch, and I think that says a lot about a game that's nearly 10 years old. It's that this is again in the sort of the Saints Row, the third category of somewhere falling between the remake and a remaster. This isn't a true full remake of Xenoblade Chronicles. Obviously the content remains the same. It's not to the same level as a Final Fantasy VII when the entire experience has been remade from the ground up. But what you have with this essentially is, the visuals have been completely overhauled. The soundtrack is obviously been enhanced and improved. There is actually additional content to this that wasn't previously in the game with it, but that's a separate entity on its own. The base and bulk of the game is here. But what you have as well are some quality of life improvements. So, for instance, the map has actually been renovated. Side quests are a big part of Xenoblade Chronicles, and within the map this time, actually, it gives you the exclamation marks of where to actually go and find the enemies you need for a particular quest. There's some UI improvements as well to make things a bit more seamless. And I think what I find interesting about Xenoblade Chronicles, the side quests especially, is that this feels like an MMORPG at times, but it's an MMORPG that's also kind of crossed with sort of like a Monster Hunter style where you're hunting big beasts and you get rich rewards. But the MMO obviously style RPG, quest style of kill X amount of creature, pick up a certain amount of items, do go to one area and come back to another, the fetch quests. All that's in there, and then you do have an auto run, which isn't that good, to be quite honest. But I mean, essentially the whole structure of an MMORPG is based within this. But the difference is that you also have a really strong, compelling narrative. There's some good characterization in there. There's really good bounce off between the characters. The story itself is excellent. And the idea of it just works really, really well. So, I mean, you've got all that sewn together, and what it results in is a really compelling, deep, rewarding RPG that you're going to be spending a lot of time with. And I think that's having that on the Switch as well is just such a convenience as well, compared to how this originally would have been played on just a nunchuck and a Wii remote, right? I mean, this is, you actually now can just literally play this in bed. And I feel like in some ways in that regard, this feels like it was made for the Switch. As you can see, there is a day and night cycle as well. You've gradually been seeing the transition between sunset and now you're at night when you're in the colony. So obviously, as you're walking around in the colony, you can have lots of, people pick up lots of side quests, as I mentioned, and there are a lot of those in Xenoblade. So you can completely ignore them, of course, if you want to, but they give you a lot of good XP, which you need to kind of, obviously the game is challenging. I think it really tests your mettle in combat for sure. So you're going to really need to kind of build your levels up and progress with the game naturally. But what I found good about the side quests is that they don't really take you out of your way too much. I mean, they will kind of basically, they're always on the right path. They're always on the way you're heading, and you do gain a lot from it. And usually it's just a case of killing a couple of enemies that are usually going to be a bit lower level than you anyway, so it's not too much of a big deal. And the best part of it is you don't even have to go back to hand them in, which you often do with MMOs. It's an auto hand in, so once you've done it, quest complete, and then you get the XP, you get all the rewards just by being stood there. But let's talk a bit more about that combat, because that for me is the big selling point of Xenoblade Chronicles, which seems odd to say, when I've just literally told you that it's automated to begin with. But the complexities go deeper when you do get the Monado, and this is basically what you need to fight back against the mechs with them. But it goes deeper still than that. You actually need to topple some enemies using certain art styles in order to fight and get them under their weak spots. You actually, dependent on where you're positioned on the map, you can actually have opportunistic strikes. So if you're stood to the side of an enemy, you'll see like a blue exclamation point over a certain art, and that means it'll have an extra impact. Likewise, if you stood behind an enemy, it'll have extra impact as well. And then there's the sort of the clairvoyant aspect of the battle, which is fascinating. So basically, when you do get the Monado, it enables you to kind of see battles play out in monochrome. And what will happen is it will show you like what would happen if an enemy is intended to go for a certain strike. It's going to go and attack your party member or you in a certain way. It's going to take a lot of damage, and it's going to show you how the result of that happens. So what you can then do is actually go to your party member, warn them by pressing a button, and then they can prepare in a certain way so they can defend against that attack, or they can do a counter attack just before that attack strikes. And then as a result of that, you can actually rewrite history essentially, which is that feels so relevant in 2020 as a new mechanic. Even it's not even a new game, but I mean it feels like it's a fresh, different mechanic that we haven't really had explored much before. You've seen the Monado on the screen at the moment, they're chatting about it, but I mean that just really shows you kind of what Xenoblade Chronicles has to it, and there's a lot to it. It still feels like a game that's ahead of its time in many, many ways. And like I said, the narrative is really strong. It's all based around the sword and the powers of the sword and the people who are wielding the sword. Goes into the history and the fight against the mechs and how, how that's affected the towns and the characters nearby in different ways. There's a lot to take in with Xenoblade Chronicles, and I think obviously there's a lot of people who are going to be playing this for the second, maybe even the third time, having played it on the Wii and the 3DS. There's a lot of people who are going to be playing this for the first time. I think wherever you sit, I think you're going to find something to benefit you. When it says definitive edition, this is the definitive edition of Xenoblade Chronicles, 100%. If you've never played it before, this is the place to play it. And I think obviously that there's a lot of filler. Like I said, the side quests can be a bit filleristic, which is not going to be for everyone. It's not quite perhaps as tight as a Final Fantasy VII remake in terms of how they've kind of structured it. But it is set up into chapters like in a similar way. The combat system is very effective and it feels very relevant in the time. I'm fully absorbed in this world. I'm really, really enjoying it. And I think as well, the beauty of this is that there is a Xenoblade Chronicles 2 out. So if you literally fly through this, you love it, you enjoy it, there's a sequel waiting there right for you now. It's been on the Switch for about a year and a half now, 2 years. It's sat there waiting for you, ready to go. It's a very well-timed, very appropriate launch. And I've just really been enjoying diving back into this. Again, I have owned this before, but I think what I found with the Switch version is I'm hooked more than I ever was. I think it's because the quality of life improvements have really helped the game, but also I think that it's just also helped that, you know, it's come at a good time in terms of, you know, there's been a bit of a gap on the Switch market for a good solid RPG for a while now. So I think, yeah, this has come at a good time, and it's very, very enjoyable. It's already sold incredibly well in its first week on store, and I imagine that's just going to keep going. But I've really enjoyed it. I've been loving it, and I'm really excited to see what Nintendo do with the future of this franchise now. I mean, I think that this has been like a shot in the arm for the franchise as a whole, and I think, you know, between the two games now being on Switch, you know, potentially there's room for a third at some point. We are planning to do some coverage of the additional chapter as well, so that will come at a later point. Yeah, Xenoblade Chronicles 2 Definitive Edition indeed, brilliant stuff, really enjoyed it, and now I'm actually itching to go back into it, and I've been talking about it for the last 10 minutes, so I think that's exactly what I'm going to go and do. But if you enjoyed this video, please check out some of the others on the channel, and don't forget to give us a like, comment and subscribe. Let us know what you thought of this video, let us know what you think about Xenoblade, and say subscribe, of course, for notifications for any future videos that do come up on the channel. But for now, see you around.